Now, you mentioned the idea that there's a sense among some of those in power in the U.S. of managing America's decline, that we're an empire in decline. Tell us more about that idea.
I've had some conversations with people in the Pentagon, this goes way back, but I mean, over the years where people are, in the last 20 years, they're saying, hey, it's inevitable. China's going to be bigger than us. They got more people. They're going to have a bigger economy, blah, 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 blah. They accept all of those theses as being essentially true, and therefore America will have to be, declining because of our age, not aging, they're aging worse than we are, but the population that's just, older, less capable, manufacturing's moved out, things of that nature, different demographics, different core values in essence. And so they're saying, and the budgeting thing where we can't even, we just can't make that many ships anymore. It's never going to happen again, they say. So therefore, we can't be on top. And in the nuclear arena, we see the Chinese build 350 ICBM silos out in central and western China, and we can't update our arsenal. So you see, and in these areas where people are like, it's inevitable. So it's a defeatist mindset.
And there's no sense that like this is exchanging like an American system of freedom and democracy for communist totalitarianism. There's like, isn't there a sense that like this is something that should be fought against at all cost?
It most certainly should be fought against. But these people, the same people that we're talking about that are from the engagement school, they don't ever talk about communism as an ideological struggle. It's more it's in Marxist economic framework. They see it in terms of economic power.
Which is why they don't see China as communist anymore, because it masquerades as having capitalist elements.
Exactly.
In the system.
They never call them communists. And you have people that say, we can't call them communists. They're not really true communists because they have a market. And so that's what we're competing against. We're competing against an ideology. And we bring that in the book as the number one problem, is that the PRC is a problem and a threat, not because of its economic power or its military power, which it is, of course, but number one is the ideology that they espouse, the ideology of totalitarian one-party rule, collectively ruling people, as opposed to what we stand for in the West and in America of individual liberty and freedom.
Well, you say we stand for that, and I think the average American does. I would say almost every American generally believes that. But what happens, and I've observed this with Americans in positions of power, and especially, like, I'll give an example. So our former mayor, Michael Bloomberg, who has business interests in China, which may or may not be a coincidence. But one of the things I noticed about him is, he became mayor of New York City, and he figured, look, I'm a billionaire. I'm mayor. I'm very smart. Actually, I probably know better than all these people. And wouldn't the city be better if I told people how to live their lives to be healthier, for example? So some of the, smoking bans were the early things. And, there's definitely, a secondhand smoke effect. So you could be like, okay, I get that. And eventually it got to the point he banned trans fats in the city. It's like, okay, like, I feel like that's kind of getting into our lives a bit. And then he wanted to ban people from buying large sodas. That never passed. But what was interesting about it was his mentality, which is his mentality was, I know best, and therefore it's better to have more of a top-down system. And I think what we see as you have, these wealthy elites, billionaires who they really do believe that they know better, and that their financial or political success is a result of them being more capable people, rather than something more likely, which is it's a combination of factors, one of which is probably luck, and there's some other ones which are maybe more negative. But the point is, they look at China and they say, well, look at all these great things that China can do. High-speed rails, for example. People were in awe of that for a long time, and that's just one example. Then when COVID hit, there was this, look at, China does it better because they have no COVID cases, and it's spreading all over here. It must be their top-down system that has protected people. And it turns out they were wrong, but that doesn't matter because, it's that mentality that is, even if 95% of Americans all believe in freedom and liberty, and 5% or even 1% or a tenth of 1% at the top envy authoritarianism, then that's an enormous danger, and it's very, very hard to perceive.
Well, I agree, and I think that mindset has permeated and runs our national security establishment. This idea that we know best, and what that breeds is this notion that there's no competition. You can't have a competing voice. So once the elite come up with their consensus, then anybody else downstream in the system that says, "Hey, why are we doing that? Why are we inviting the Chinese to RIMPAC in Hawaii?"
Yeah.
So, I mean, things of that nature, it becomes like, you can't question what we've already decided. And we know from our experience and what made America great was this idea that we competed. We had a marketplace. And if I can sell something better, it's cheaper and faster and does what you want better than the other guys, then I'm going to sell more of them. And so that idea, and we have it in history and in scholastic arena, the Socratic method, where people sit down and argue about ideas, and the person with the best idea wins. Well, you can't have that kind of system where it's forbidden to challenge the norm, the orthodoxy. You can't challenge what's orthodoxy. And so we have that now where we can't question why we should not engage with or should engage with China. We can't question that. It's sacrosanct. It's orthodoxy. Engaging with China is good. Anybody that questions it must either be a idiot or subversive.
Right, and there are systems in place to prevent people from publicizing alternative views. Like, for example, social media, YouTube obviously does a lot of censorship and demonetization. Now their methods are even harder to track, but it's happening. And you've got, media, most of the media companies are controlled by just a few corporations. So you've got that. You've got scientific journals, for example, that would, when COVID first came, they would only report one way, and anyone who had an alternative perspective on the origins of COVID was basically kicked out of that medical establishment. So it's not just they don't want you to challenge it; they've really set up systems to make it extremely risky to challenge the orthodoxy.
That goes against our natural right. It's laid out in the Bill of Rights, our First Amendment right, freedom of speech. We have the right to express what we want without the government doing anything that you just said. And it's this partnership between the government and these big tech firms that are doing this, and it's completely against the First Amendment.
So, well, I mean, technically, the First Amendment just says Congress shall pass no law abridging freedom of speech. And there's lots of ways to get around that if what you really want to do is censor speech.
Well, on that point about free speech, we've talked a lot about the some of the elite being essentially co-opted by the Chinese Communist Party, but you also see a very big change in the American population at large from during the Cold War, where there was people understood the ideological threat of communism. You say we won the Cold War, but there was this long march through the institutions, and it seemed like most Americans also were not concerned about the rise of China. Many Americans began to develop more positive views of communism and socialism and more negative views about America itself. So this was a change that happened not just at the top, but it was also happening all throughout American society.
Yeah, there's no question that part of this embracing of China and the Chinese Communist Party included our educational system. We talk a bit in the book about military, joint professional military education, and some of my conversations with my colleagues that are still in the system is that, they're teaching at service schools, mid-level and senior officer professional military education, and they're getting folks in, junior officers who've been junior officers are now mid-level officers or senior officers, and they're finding that they're having to train them in the basics of communism because they're not getting it before they join the service or while they're in the service in their earlier schools. And so the reality is that in our school system, K through 12 in the United States, the things that you guys are pretty young, so I don't even know what you got trained in. But when I was young, the basics in American civics, our Constitution.
Did you learn about communist regimes in high school?
Yeah.
Did you learn about it, Chris?
I learned that if I read a book, I got a Pizza Hut pizza.
Okay, because my history lessons did not include, I mean, we went up to World War II, but we basically skipped the Russian Revolution. And, of course, the Chinese Communist Revolution wasn't until 49 after the World War II. And we didn't learn about Vietnam.
Holodomor. I never learned about that.
About what?
The Ukrainian famine.
Oh, yeah. So there was basically the entire, there was no section on communism, and there wasn't even pieces of it.
Well, so you're making the point. You're making the point is we have a 30, 40 year effort where our school system was, you could say run by Marxists that didn't want us to learn these things and understand.
Right.
them.
And it's not so much that they lied to us exactly. It was just lies by omitting certain things and just a refusal to teach things. And this is, it's kind of what we see in journalism. And because I was a journalist for a long time, and one of the things that most people don't know about journalism is your editors don't say, hey, I want you to write this article that's going to lie to people. They don't say that. They never say that. And articles generally tend to be accurate, at least in the big media. What you don't know as a reader is that one story that you read is one of maybe 10 pitches that the reporter said, hey, here's some stories I want to cover. And the editor says, you cover this one, don't cover that, don't cover that, don't cover that, don't cover that, don't cover that.
No, I think it's more insidious than that now. Maybe at one point it was like that, but now it's like you see in journalism. Journalists are seeking to, they start with a narrative and then they look for facts to support their narrative. Especially with fact checking, we see that too. It's more narrative.
I do feel like I've seen that, but like a less cynical approach is just simply the objective reality of you pitch a lot of stories and only one of them gets chosen, right? And so over time, all the things that get omitted, they never make the news. They never make any of the major news.
But a more cynical approach, they're all communists.